to our session, How Far AI Has Come and Where It's Headed. Hi, I'm Emily, and I'm the Senior Manager for Events here at GovLoop. And today I have the added pleasure of also being your moderator. So thanks so much for joining me. And a special thank you to our sponsors at UiPath, Agentic Automation, Stirk AI, Granicus, and Carasoft for helping us put on this session today. So let's jump right into it because the pace of AI advancement, well, it's staggering. It's constantly learning, evolving, and reshaping how we work. And for government agencies, staying ahead of that curve isn't just beneficial, it's essential. But with so many developments happening so fast, understanding where AI stands today and where it's headed, that can feel like a full-time job. So today, our experts will share their perspectives on the current state of AI in the public sector, emerging applications, and the challenges that lie ahead. It's going to be some great content, but before we get into that, I do have a few housekeeping items to go over. So, first things first, we have a wealth of resources available for you on the console under that resources button along the bottom panel. This is also where you can see our speakers and their titles, so make sure you check that out. If you need closed captioning feature, just look for that show captions icon along the bottom right-hand side of the panel, and that's where you'll find that added accessibility. Now, we hope you don't have any technical difficulties today, but if you do, send us a message through that Q&A tab, and one of my GovLoop colleagues will help you out. You can use that same tab to submit questions to our speakers, and we want your questions, so don't you dare be shy. Put your questions in early and often. You can also chat with your fellow Govies using that chat button as well. Finally, we are recording this training, so check your inboxes tomorrow because we will be emailing you a link so you can watch the entire session on demand. All right, with all of that housekeeping out of the way, let me introduce you to our speakers. Joining us, we have Miles Latham, who is the Director of AI for the state of Vermont. We have Luke Norris, who's the Vice President of Platform Strategy and Digital Transformation at Granicus. Anhad Singh, who is the founder and CEO of Stark AI. Dr. Donnie Wendt, who is a researcher and author of the book AI Strategy and Security, a roadmap for secure, responsible, and resilient AI adoption. And last but certainly not least, we have Chris Raddick, who is the public sector CTO for Customer Success Vice President at UiPath. Thank you all so much for being here. And to better understand each of our speakers' perspectives on AI and where it's headed, we sat down for one-on-one interviews with them. Here are those conversations. Here to talk about how far AI has come and where it's headed is Miles Latham, who is the Director of AI for the state of Vermont. Miles, thanks so much for being with us today.
Of course. Happy to be here.
All right, so AI, this is the topic that everyone and their grandmother is talking about. But when it comes to government and their implementation of AI, things may look a little bit different than they do in the private sector. So, talk to me a little bit from your perspective. What are some of the AI advancements that are coming into government and really having an impact?
Sure. So in general terms, the main high-level trend that we're seeing is a shift from AI tools that augment human workflows, like a chatbot, say ChatGPT, that you can use to draft emails and summarize documents, moving towards AI systems that are more agentic or autonomous in nature. So for a physical metaphor, it's sort of like transitioning from using power tools to build something to using a 3D printer or a CNC machine, something that has a higher level of actual autonomous work relative to being strictly controlled by a human at every single step, if that makes sense. One of the main drivers of this is a relatively new technology called Model Context Protocol, or MCP. For a non-technical definition, you can think of it as an additional layer that sits on top of a general purpose large language model and makes it much easier to plug that model into various other applications, like, say, an IT ticketing system, for example. So that this MCP paradigm, it's basically like a universal USB adapter, but for large language models. And it makes it much easier to integrate these models into the applications that we use in our day-to-day workflows. And the ultimate goal here, at least from our perspective here in the state of Vermont, is very much not to replace any human workflows, but we interface heavily with a wide variety of applications. And the more we can do to get those applications to more seamlessly communicate with one another, the more efficient our work becomes. So really, this shift towards increasingly agentic artificial intelligence solutions, which in my eyes is largely driven by MCP and similar paradigms that make it easier to plug language models into other applications. Really, what it's doing, and what we're aiming to do with it, is reduce as much as possible the burdensome work of interfacing across the different applications that we encounter in government. And as anyone who works in the government knows, working with those systems isn't always super easy. So being able to facilitate things like creating IT tickets with natural language prompts rather than having to manually specify everything to be included in the ticket, the hope is that using AI to facilitate that type of work is really just going to free us up to spend more time doing the tasks that AI can't really do yet.
Wonderful. I appreciate you giving those answers for us non-technical folks too. We've got a lot of technical people in our audience, but there's a lot of people that hear the technical stuff like myself and start to zone out. So I really appreciate you breaking that down for me in a way that I could understand. So let's talk about barriers to adoption because what you're talking about here really sounds transformative and, in a lot of ways, possibly freeing up a bunch of people's time to maybe do more high level work or something like that. But it's not, like you said, just as quick and easy as snapping your fingers or plugging something in. So, what are some of the barriers to adoption, and what are some ways that you all in the state are looking to overcome them?
Yeah, so one thing I'm going to reference here that's been making waves over the past couple of weeks is this recent report by MIT. I believe it was their Project Nanda initiative, and they studied enterprise AI programs in the private sector and found that approximately 95% of them failed to generate any revenue. That obviously was a pretty notable news story when it came out a couple weeks ago. And I think even though that was the private sector, the underlying factors they identified are still absolutely relevant as barriers to adoption in government. The main one is that, the issue here, it's not with the underlying tools that we're using or their capabilities. The limitations that organizations typically run into have a lot more to do with educating users on how to effectively use the tools, which is a significant undertaking that is often underestimated in terms of how complex it will be to get everybody who needs to use the tool to a level of technical proficiency where they can do so efficiently. And then additionally, another critical factor is your data governance standards and your underlying data model. When you talk about barriers to AI adoption, you will hear the phrase data governance again and again and again. But the underlying concept here is that any artificial intelligence tool is fundamentally both powered but also limited by the quality and the security of the underlying data that it has access to. So if you have an ambiguous data governance model and it's not clear intuitively, where your data is sourced, how disparate data sources are linked together, if those are being fed into an AI model, you're inherently going to see limitations in the quality of the output relative to whether relative to the alternative universe where you ensured that that data governance foundation was solid before attempting whatever AI pilot program it is that you tried to implement. The third thing that I would identify is that, AI is still in many respects a highly specialized series of tools. There are a lot of problems that AI is not a fantastic fit for solving. And identifying good use cases for an AI solution really fundamentally requires thoroughly understanding the nature of existing human workflows and the precise bottlenecks and pain points that human workers are running into when they're trying to undertake that work. This can be kind of challenging for senior managers or directors who are a little bit more removed from the day-to-day work of their employees to identify. So it really requires having a clear line of communication with employees and taking the time to thoroughly understand the actual nature of the day-to-day work so that you can identify what problems actually need to be solved with AI rather than starting with the idea that you're going to do some type of AI pilot program or implement some type of AI solution without a clear sense of what specific problem it is that you're trying to solve.
Gotcha. That makes a whole lot of sense. All right, final question for you here, Miles. AI, generative AI, I guess I should say, really kind of came into the market a couple of years ago and now everyone's talking about it, but AI has itself has obviously been around for a while. So that begs the question, what's next? So talk to me from a policy and implementation standpoint. Where do you see this technology growing or changing in government over the next couple of years?
So future forecasts, especially with the technology that changes so rapidly, are incredibly challenging. So I am almost certain that in some respects I'll be wrong here. But I think that a couple of issues to consider are one, the proliferation of more and more different types of AI tools, and how to address those adequately from a policy perspective. So, for example, one issue that has been becoming more and more frequent at organizations, both in the private and public sector, is the proliferation of AI meeting assistants or AI note takers. Many of these are essentially autonomous agents that automatically join calls once a user signs up for the service. And a lot of users aren't necessarily familiar with how they actually work. They aren't familiar with how to deactivate them for a given meeting if they're joining a meeting that they don't want the AI assistant to be joining. And that presents a lot of issues from a security and privacy perspective, right? Because, we firms can have meetings or government organizations can have meetings where AI meeting assistants are joining calls and nobody knows who the assistant is associated with or how to remove it. We've actually heard of that happening with a couple of affiliate organizations over the past couple of weeks, and it's becoming more and more of a problem. So over the next couple of years, one of the main questions that I have is what other similar applications of artificial intelligence are going to come up where the rise in the use of the technology outpaces people's familiarity with how to safely and appropriately handle it, because that's really at a fundamental level that's the main security and privacy risk that I see with the proliferation of AI tools is these tools are extremely technically complex relative to how superficially easy they are designed to be to interact with. And that presents a pretty significant knowledge gap between how easy it is to adopt something versus how easy it is to actually understand it. Speaking more broadly about future trends, I think that the increasing trend in agentic or autonomous AI applications that I mentioned, that's just going to continue expanding more and more. And I think that over time, say over the next 3 to 5 years, that's going to continue really substantially decreasing the amount of burdensome or easily repeatable kind of mundane work that government employees do, provided these types of AI solutions are implemented effectively, as I mentioned. That's a little bit optimistic, I think, in many respects, but that's our desired end state is getting to a point where again, government workers are free to spend less time on mundane but still draining bureaucratic or systems integration work, and they're free to spend more time meeting the needs of constituents. That's the goal really with all of this is just to improve the quality of the services that we provide. And I do think that in many respects, the trends that we're seeing in AI are moving in that direction. That there are obviously significant risks, and that's not even speaking to some of the higher level challenges with the increasing use of AI, namely environmental concerns like the water usage of data centers and the massive power usage that we're seeing with some of the hyperscale data centers that are being developed. In terms of how to address those from a policy perspective and what makes sense in that respect, I think that's a whole entire high level conversation, but it's certainly something that we're keeping track of here in Vermont, because obviously the environment is pretty important to us. But that's all to say there are a lot of risks and a lot of challenges. But overall, I do think that over the next several years, we're going to see a rise in the types of autonomous AI, or more specifically semi-autonomous AI solutions that I mentioned, that again are not replacing human jobs, but they're freeing up humans to do the type of more creative and more person to person work that I think the vast majority of people really enjoy compared to entering IT tickets.
Well, Miles, I really appreciate your insights, and we won't hold you accountable to your predictions by any means, but I really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today.
Of course, yeah, really happy to be here, and thank you again for bringing me on.
Agency leaders see vast potential in artificial intelligence, from the application of machine learning to newer solutions based on generative AI and now agentic AI. The problem is that these solutions also come with risks, especially in the areas of security, data privacy, and bias. So, if agencies do not understand and address these risks up front, they leave themselves vulnerable to serious challenges in the future. My colleague John Monroe sat down with Stirk AI's Anhad Singh and Dr. Donnie Wendt to understand where some of these pain points pop up when it comes to the AI lifecycle. Here's what they had to say.
So when we start looking back at the AI lifecycle or AI process, it's really subject to various types of attacks and issues throughout that entire life cycle. We Everything, of course, starts at the beginning with our data, and we start thinking about training, and is that data or that model been poisoned? Is there inaccurate data that we're learning from, right? So that's kind of at the very beginning of the process. But as we move through the machine learning process, we continually face different sorts of issues. When we're in, let's say, in production and it's in what we call inference phase. So we have to be cognizant of things like exploratory attacks, where the adversary is trying to figure out how our machine learning model works so they can later do an evasion on, say, a detection system. If we're talking about like large language models, we have to worry about things like jailbreaking and prompt injections while they're in use. Of course, privacy is a huge issue when we start talking about this. Normally, powered by our machine learning models are powered by extensive amounts of data, oftentimes private data, and we have to worry about things like membership inference. So, can I infer that, say, an odd was used in this training data, right? And then determine something about him from that. We also have to worry about, training data extraction. We've seen some issues with that, where attackers have been able to actually extract some of the data used in the training models. Supply chain, when we start, that's So it's not just about the ones we develop. Oftentimes we're putting in tools, whether that's business tools, cybersecurity tools. All of these are powered by AI systems now. So we have to be cognizant of that supply chain for all of the software we're using, and whether the data or models have been compromised, or whether there's backdoors in those data or models. And then I think finally that thing that's really taken hold now is with the agentic AI. And we start talking about that, we have to worry about things like memory poisoning, or the agent misusing one of the tool sets. So possibly misusing one of our cybersecurity tool sets to actually attack us. And also privilege escalation or compromise for those agents. So we see all the way from the start when we're training into all the way through operationalization, there are various points of attack that we have to worry about.
Yeah, that's great, Donnie. Thanks for providing such granular insights into all these issues. I want to just zoom out and present a larger picture here. Is when we're talking about AI security, it's at every step of the process, right? So, like John mentioned, AI lifecycle, right? It's actually very, very aligned with the software development lifecycle. You have the training data that literally you don't even have models yet. You first collect the data. That could have privacy issues, and then you have model issues. You could have issues in the model at runtime, at build time, right? It's a risk assessment problem. It's a cybersecurity runtime problem. So really, when enterprises are trying to augment AI security into their existing processes, it's a whole end-to-end journey that they have to enhance now. Uh, Pen testing or red teaming the models, applying proper guardrails around it, and filtering out the bad content that could cause the issues that Donnie mentioned. I think that's paramount now.
Thanks so much, Anhad and Donnie, for breaking down the challenges and opportunities of responsible AI and security measures moving forward. We really appreciate your insights. Most people have encountered hard to navigate government processes that belie the dedicated, sincere work of agency staff. But using artificial intelligence tools, including generative and agentic AIs, public servants can transform such resident to government interactions, delivering more personalized benefits more quickly while streamlining workflows and improving efficiencies. Still, successful AI outcomes don't just happen. So, my colleague Candace Thorson sat down with Granicus's Luke Norris to understand the clear purpose agencies must have, what specific processes do they want to improve, and, well, why? Here's how Luke answered those questions.
Clearly, AI is here. It's not going anywhere. So I think that has been a good lesson that, it's not a fad. We probably are still in the hype cycle, but it is absolutely a technology that is transforming rapidly, transforming quickly, and is going to be here to stay. So I think that's one. The second is, I think, specifically for Gen AI, absolutely, Gen AI can have transformative impacts for governments in a variety of ways. It can streamline how government staff do their job, helping them be more efficient with finding, accessing, creating, and leveraging, large language models to create content to help, streamline parts of their job. So that absolutely, we've seen. On the other side, we've seen governments completely benefit from generative AI digital agents that can be used to actually power better resident to government interactions. And I think what we've specifically seen here is that the way that those operate is really driven by the content and the data that they have access to. And so I think, AI has been so exciting for so many people that it's been looked at from the lens of technology first. But I think when we step back and see what we've learned at Granicus is that generative AI digital agents that harness the power of AI are only as good as the underlying content. And the content is a place where governments have a lot of opportunity to make investments to make sure that those content and data sets are clear, actionable, provide great guidance, and are really curated to help governments be able to better serve their residents.
That's great. There are so many important lessons, and I love the idea of the it's only as good as the data that feeds it. How can AI help agencies improve their service delivery? Because that's such a big part of what government does.
Yeah, great question. So I think pulling back to what we were just chatting about, conversational digital agents are absolutely going to be the way that governments will begin serving their residents, certainly in 2025 and increasingly in 2026 and beyond, right? It is likely to become the new user interface that residents will expect and demand. And so to make that helpful, residents are going to expect to be able to come and ask a number of questions, and those questions are going to pull from content and data that these digital agents have access to. And so one of the ways that governments can harness them is making sure that they are leveraging more than just a large language model, that they are curating digital agents like our Granicus government experience agent to actually be pointed at and curating specific sets of data that can help residents interact with government. The next is they can do a lot of tuning to make sure that those agents are empathetic and understand and know the context of government to citizen interactions, right? We use so many different words in government, like, the benefits and program and beneficiaries or permits or licenses. When you think about that in a local context, digital agents have to have that context to be able to provide these empathetic conversations to residents. And then the last part of it is, agentic AI is absolutely going to be part of the new frontier. That is where more and more governments are going to invest in having digital agents that can help automate tasks for both government staff and eliminate workflow and inefficiencies in processes, but also to help residents navigate complex systems by being able to automate some of those tasks. So I really think what you'll see is the combination of generative AI and agentic AI, certainly together over the next year, will really be some of the ways that governments will start using those two technologies to deliver much better services to their residents.
Thanks so much, Candace and Luke, for really drilling into the details of AI's impact on customer experience. It certainly gave me a new perspective, and I know it did for our audience as well. Given tight budgets and constrained staffing, state and local agencies know they must lean into automation. But in many cases, they've taken traditional rules based automation as far as it can go. Artificial intelligence has brought important new capabilities, but that too can only go so far. Most AI tools are designed to automate individual tasks, making it difficult to accelerate larger workflows. Agentic AI breaks those limitations. My colleague John Monroe sat down with UiPath's Chris Raddick to understand how agentic AI will play a role in state and local government transformations in the future. Here's what he had to say.
I think step one is we need to understand at the state or local municipality level what agencies have the most knowledge workers that conduct largely administrative tasks. So you go through that and you say, all right, we have DMV. Could we have a license renewal agent for nearly every knowledge worker in DMV? We could. Then you look at unemployment, a big COVID era automation trend that certainly we saw at UiPath. What if you had a claims agent for every single unemployment office? And then finally, HHS Medicaid, the big beautiful bill, massive amount of change that is going to occur with federal funding eligibility requirements. What if you had an eligibility or a claims agent within every public health organization. So I think part of the challenge with the tech landscape right now, all attacking agentic, is you need to start with a basic vision for your state. You need to make this practical and real for not the citizen yet, but actually for your employees, because they're going to be the ones who are working side by side. We're a firm believer in attended agents. So where you're actually working with the agent, checking their work with human in the loop workflows. And it's not just the Wild West where you're going to have this army of agents that are autonomous, suddenly doing public servants work for them. That is not the vision. But we're super excited because it's becoming real. And I go back to I'm big into vision-based technology strategy and deployment. You have to have that vision to really take advantage of this technology.
All right, so let's step back. I mean, what do you see as kind of the state of AI in state and local government right now? What conversations are kind of trending with leaders?
The state of AI. All right, so as I speak to CTOs, CIOs, and executives on the mission side, there's a couple of conversations that are trending. Number one is leaders are debating large language model standards and selection. A little bit of analysis paralysis, all for good reason. It's very important that you're adopting LLMs in a safe way. So that's discussion one is what's your LLM standard? When are you going to go into production across the state? Because that's a big part of agentic automation. We integrate with an LLM to do a lot of we'll call it non-deterministic, the unstructured work that is much more fluid. Number two is they're really leaning into machine learning. In our world, that's a document understanding model where you're actually able to take something like a benefits application and extract, validate, and start to trigger a workflow with a very unstructured document, something like a PDF, even a paper form that's scanned. That's trending with, I'd say, every state I talk to, they are either taking advantage of machine learning document understanding models or they want to take advantage because they realize that's before you get into agents, you really need to unlock your documents. And then the more progressive states, there's plenty of them, are saying, hey, I really want to understand where agents can make a big impact. Let's explore that. I'm talking to different vendors and technology providers. I want to understand how I can make this happen. But we're early stages here in terms of the adoption cycle, where that's why it's so exciting because you just see we're very close to getting that majority into adopting agents.
All right, let's talk more about agents. I mean, what is agentic AI and why is it especially important when it comes to automation?
So automation was traditionally rules-based, which means you have to understand your click path or your data flow and actually code scripts or rules to repeat that task. That's what RPA is fundamentally. Agentic gets us into what I call the gray area of automation, and that is maybe you're analyzing 3 different documents or analyzing a legacy data source, a document, and a policy, and you need to make a determination. For example, a claims agent, that's a common workflow. You're going to rely on an LLM or a large action model, an AI model to help you with that. And then you can start to review these recommendations within a more rules-based workflow where you're actually making formal changes within a system or inputting data into your system of record. So it's expanded. It used to be black and white. You can either code a rule, very specific and repeatable to do an automation, but now you can get into the gray area where you're into these very fluid workflows, which makes it really exciting because all of the mission critical workflows, claims, eligibility, the license renewal and permitting, it's all very fluid. These knowledge workers have to understand a lot of different source systems and policies in order to do their jobs.
Thanks so much, Chris and John. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective on the transformational power of agentic AI in the state and local government space. You gave us a lot to think about, and I really appreciate it. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today's session. I want to thank our wonderful speakers for sharing their brain power with us today. Just a quick reminder that we do have some great resources available for you to download, so make sure you check those out in the resources section before you sign off. We'll also send you a link to the on-demand version of this training, so check that in your inboxes tomorrow in case you want to watch it again or send it along to one of your colleagues. And on behalf of GovLoop, UiPath Agentic Automation, Stirk AI, Granicus, and Karasov, I hope you enjoyed today's session. And as always, we really appreciate and value the work that you do. So thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us this afternoon. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you at our next GovLoop training. Bye, everybody.